Planning and Zoning Joint Meeting tonight, November 28, 2017. Thank you for being here. Tonight, our prayer and pledge will be led by our Longview City Manager, Mr. David Willard. Please rise.
Let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for this day and your blessings. We thank you for the season we've celebrated of Thanksgiving, and we are thankful for all the blessings you've given us, and we recognize that the blessings we do have come from you. Most of all, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who died for our sins. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please join me as we pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Willard. Cut up, Miss Frankie. No hurry. This is a nice change. Usually I have a real bald-headed guy sitting next to me. No, this is great. This is perfect. I like this a lot. I wouldn't refer to you, David. I'm sorry. I want to first thank everybody for being here tonight. This is an important meeting, and I appreciate the Planning and Zoning Commission being here, the council being here. We can discuss the business of the city and get this process rolling along. To citizen comment tonight, I have no speaker cards. Anybody like to speak on behalf of the citizens' comments? Fill out a card later. Very well. We'll begin with presentation items. Presentation, United Development Code process, final diagnostic report and community feedback by consultants Freese and Nichols. Tonight, Daniel Harrison with Freese and Nichols will lead our presentation. Daniel.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you for having us out tonight. And what I'll do is I'll make this a little less formal, so I won't speak behind the podium, so I'll walk around, but I'll try not to have my back to y'all all the time. My name's Daniel Harrison, and I'm with Freese and Nichols. And with me today is Wendy Chabet, and Nabila Nur, and Erica Craycraft. And we're the team working on developing the ordinance. And what we are going to do today is present to you the diagnostic report. What we're going to talk about is a little bit about the first thing is talk about the timeline and the scope, what we're doing, when we're doing it. Go over the diagnostic process, what's been done so far. Give you an overview of what's in the report so we can walk through those issues. We'll talk about some next steps, and then also what we want to do, most importantly, is have a discussion with you tonight and see if you had any thoughts, any ideas, anything else you wanted to add, because at the end of the meeting, we sort of want to have consensus that we're heading in the right direction. This is sort of like when you get your family together and you're trying to decide where to go eat. We just want to make sure that we're all heading in the same direction and going to the same place. So that's really what we're trying to focus in on. And one of the things that we want to highlight, we have the diagnostic issues in there, but we know as we go down the road, there will be additional things that come up that we haven't discovered yet, and we'll also be tackling those as well. But what we're going to do is highlight the ones that we've identified so far. So with the timeline and scope, the process is really divided into two phases. In the first part of developing the UDC, which is the Unified Development Code, is doing a diagnostic. Similar to you take your car in, they provide a diagnostic, they tell you what things you can fix and update, or similar to going to the doctor and they provide you a diagnostic. And we're doing the same thing with the zoning, subdivision, and a whole bunch of other codes to say what things can we address and look at and improve in the current regulations. So phase one is that diagnostic process. Once we get done with that diagnostic process, we move into developing the UDC. So that's when we'll actually start writing and crafting and spending a lot of time working through some of those issues once we have the clear direction of where we want to be going forward. So phase one, a little bit of the timeline. We did diagnostic interviews back in August, and that's when we sat down with developers, individuals, to ask them their thoughts and opinions, how things have been working, what they'd like to see changed, and other items like that. We had conference calls and meetings with staff to talk about, here's what we heard during the interview process, and flesh out some of these ideas and concepts a little bit more. Once we did that with staff in October, we had a community meeting where we talked about here are the issues that we see. We presented those. We had some voting exercises for everyone to participate at the meeting. And then the second part of the meeting was open just boards where we got people's ideas. And I think you have a copy of those boards with you in your packet. So you can see what people were writing. We'll highlight some of those in the process here. So where we are in phase one, we're getting close to the end, which is now having our meeting with you, tell you what we've seen, and get your feedback. So then we move on to phase two after we get done with the diagnostic report. We're going to have 5 meetings with staff overall, going through January to July to work through some of these issues. We'll come back next to you guys in March to do another joint meeting because we're taking this in processes, because we don't want to give you the whole UDC at one time because it's too much for the mind to process, and you'll probably zone out like any person would, because it's a whole bunch of code and a whole bunch of regulations. So we're going to take this in chunks, manageable chunks. Then we'll also come back for another joint workshop with you in September. So we'll have some more information to share with you. And then, of course, individual P&Z and council meetings to consider adopting the UDC in November and December. So at the end of the year, about a year from now, we'll be wrapping up the project and everything will be able to be adopted. So the diagnostic process, we wanted to tell you a little bit more about how that worked. What we did as a team, we evaluated the codes, we went through your codes and the different sections on there. So we did our internal review of the code. We also did, like I said, those stakeholder workshops where we had input from users. So this was elected officials, this was staff, this was developers. Then we moved on to just the general public. What does the general public think after we had that? And then, of course, tonight with our joint meeting. So that's sort of the diagnostic process about gathering input. So what we did is we looked at the diagnostic, all the current regulations under these 9 categories that you see up here on the screen. So we had, building and structure, signs, sidewalks, subdivision, zoning. And what we did is, in your diagnostic report, there's 62 issues identified. And so on the screen, you can sort of see how those broke out. Most of the issues that we identified were in the zoning, followed by the subdivision ordinance. So those were opportunities that we can address there. And once again, we have 62 here on the screen, but that doesn't mean when we're going through the details that we find other stuff that we can address. And so this is not an all-inclusive list. This is our starting point moving down the road. And then, of course, talk to you a little bit about, we had our community meeting where we had our feedback and some responses to that, and then tonight. So looking over the report, the report's divided into those 9 sections that you just saw. So, of course, we took a look at, on the left here is where we have all our existing sections outlined: building structures, electrical code, fire prevention. And so this is how we're seeing those divide out into our new sections. And so we'll be organizing it because, once again, this process is to make the document user-friendly and for people to find information pretty easily and to sort of end that frustration, because no one's ever going to look at the code for easy reading or something like that. They want to find their information quickly, and we think a new outline and structure will aid in that effort. Of course, improving the user-friendliness. This is a use chart where, if you know, we have our different zoning district and what uses are allowed. We'll have definitions for everything in the use chart. It'll all be hyperlinked, so when someone has this open on their computer, they'll be able to click on that and find out what that definition is. So it's great for staff, it's great for P&Z and council, and it's great for the person at home downloading the zoning ordinance, trying to find out, well, what can I use my land for, or what is my neighbor able to use their land for, which is often a good question. We also want to clarify the overall development process, because we know that can be a little confusing sometimes. What code am I working at? Is this a zoning question? Is this a subdivision ordinance question? Is this a building code question? So we have some processes in there that we think we could just clarify the overall development process using diagrams and graphics, and we want to improve that process. So those are just some general things. Looking at the building and safety code, one of the things that we're really going to do on that, and the main focus of that, is just consolidate all our different elements into one section and make it more user-friendly. As far as the codes go, there isn't any issues as far as like a safety issue or something like that, but that's more of a reformatting and a reorganization of those type of codes. Flood damage and prevention and tree preservation. Another member of our team, Edra, she's a stormwater expert, and so this is one of her parts to help us do the analysis for. So we had 5 different things in here talking about reviewing and updating the contents for the flood damage and prevention. There's just some updates that we can do to help things move along and to make sure that we're in agreement with where you want to go. We also wanted to provide alternative solutions to ensure adequate drainage. There's some other opportunities to address some of the drainage issues that we can add in there that can be some alternatives. Not necessarily is there always one way to fix it. We want to look at some multiple ways, and so we can address that. We wanted to review the standards for on-site detention. There's some ways that we can, of course, improve the detention ponds and some of these other facilities that when we were talking about storm drainage, like when rain comes, and what are we going to do with all this water so we're not flooding anyone, because we want to avoid flooding and those type of issues. We also want to address the adverse impacts for downstream people. Once again, if people above you in the watershed are developing and all that water, and just think, if someone concretes their entire property and then everyone did that in the above you, how much water and runoff that would create for your property, and that creates creeks move and things like that. So there's things that we can address with downstream impacts. We're relocating the tree preservation section to be a little bit more friendly. And this is green because one of the things we did during our community meeting is we had boards for everybody, and we also did the polling questions, and the polling questions matched the boards. And so we will take a look at some of those results from that meeting here in just the next slide. We also wanted to reflect the current stormwater pollution and prevention plan requirements, mentioning TCEQ and making sure that we're coordinated with their standards and all our federal standards for all of our stormwater pollution prevention. We did ask the question about the tree preservation. Tree preservation was identified as being very important for the community. We had about 50 to 60% on that. What we had is, and you have these boards in your packet, but we pulled out a few of those when we were asking about tree preservation. Are trees important? One person saying absolutely, visitors come here and are amazed by our natural beauty and resources. But there is some need to remove some hazardous trees. So yes, trees are good, but yes, we got to sort of balance what is good and what is to be saved. Some other balancing comments in there about it's okay, but don't go too far. So these are some of the issues that we heard regarding our tree preservation. Signs. What we had in our sign section is reviewing and updating components of the sign ordinances. There's always updates that need to be done. There is some recent Supreme Court rulings about content-based sign that we need to make sure is incorporated into the sign section of the code. We also want to reduce the variance requests regarding pole signs, because we know that's an issue with pole signs and people reusing those. So we want to make sure that if there's a way we can fix our ordinance so people don't have to come to us for variances, that's one of the things we want to address. And then evaluating the different types of signs allowed, what's appropriate in what area. Ensuring site visibility triangle. This is, of course, we don't want signs. If you're approaching an intersection and ever been trying to look left or right to see if you're safe to go out into the street and there's a sign in your way or something like that. We want to make sure that our visibility triangle is clear. So that's one of the things that we'll be addressing. And then also, as far as implementing the code, we talk about measuring the how do we measure signs and the implementation of that. So this is one of the things that we clarify both for on the admin side, and also if you're the sign contractor trying to make sure that you're putting all the signs together and making sure, because you don't want to get to the permitting process, then find out your sign is not, you've measured incorrectly. Streets and sidewalks. We wanted to include language to clarify the use of public funds, and we'll touch on that here in the next slide. Include provisions for streetlights as far as making sure that we have adequate visibility when it's night and that we don't have all these dark areas. Including provisions for sidewalks. We have a slide about that, whether sidewalks should be provided. Improving street connectivity. What ways can we make sure that there's different ways to get around, so we're not necessarily funneling everyone through one way, creating traffic issues and everyone trying to squeeze through one point. We also wanted to establish standards to implement complete streets, and what complete streets are really addressing is looking at the street as a whole for both cars, bikes, and pedestrians. So that's one of the things that we wanted to address. And then including requirements that would trigger a traffic impact analysis to figure out, okay, this type of development, are we going to need a deceleration lane here on the side or these type of things. So that's one of the things that we'll take a look at. So these green ones that we highlighted on the previous slide, those once again were the ones that we asked at the meeting in October. And so we had a survey poll for that. Most of the residents were in favor of private streets meeting the same construction standard as public streets. So we asked the question, do you think private streets should meet the same as public streets? And so there was support for that. Some of the results that you could see that were written on the board. Depends on the project, but generally yes. Yes, it costs the city a lot of money when the subdivision streets fail. Road quality okay, but away the sidewalks and curbs in rural and less dense areas. So we had some different ideas about that, but a lot of balancing comments too in there. When we asked about sidewalks, we had the majority of people preferred sidewalks to be built on both sides of the street for future developments. Majority of the people identified installing sidewalks in currently developed areas as very important. Some of the more personalized feedback that we had does cost. The cost of the sidewalk needs to be considered. So it's a big sidewalk, smaller sidewalk. There's always cost. Every arterial street needs to have a sidewalk on one side. That was another comment. And then we talked about sidewalks in school zones. Those are important because it's ways, of course, our kids are getting to their school. We also talked about establishing standards to implement complete streets. And you can sort of see in here, it's sort of identifying the three areas that you're trying to target with complete streets, whether it's cars or whether it's someone on a bicycle or whether it's people walking adjacent to the street. So that was identified as being very important to address. Some of the comments that we had there, we need safe bicycle lanes was one. Traffic tends to slow down in areas with fewer lanes, sidewalks, storefront street parking, benefiting businesses and creating places and communities. So not only do we need to think about streets as, yes, they're an important way to get from A to B, but it also affects the people living next to those streets. And so the enjoyment of the property can be something, if it's really a raceway, that sort of damages some of your enjoyment of your property, depending on what your use is. So looking at subdivision, we talked about clarifying the planning procedures. We know this could be a difficult thing sometimes, whether it's just a preliminary plat or is it minor plat, all these different planning type terms. We'd like to address some of these with the layout and organization of the code and also our flow charts and different graphics that we can easily communicate this, so it'd be easy for someone to just look on the website, look at the graphic and see what is the process that I'm supposed to be following rather than trying to navigate several pages of the code to figure that out. Also referencing the engineering criteria manual. Not everything is in the code. When we're looking at our criteria manual, that's more when we're looking at our specs, how, where am I going to put, if I'm designing a subdivision, where am I going to put my water meter? Where do the lines go? Things like that. So we just want to make sure that we're referencing that in all the important places. We also want to make sure all our platting language is in one type so people get to see their menu choices. So that's one of the things we'd like to address. Of course, we're going to continue the pre-submission conference that was identified during the interviews as working well. And there's opportunities to streamline our procedures and our standards. And then we're also wanting to continue utilizing our submission and filing dates. A couple other things, subdivision related. We looking at renaming variances, waivers, because variances are more what we're thinking of addressed in zoning. So when you're going to the Board of Adjustment, that's when you're going to get a variance, and that's really, and state law has established you need a hardship, things like that. When we do waivers, we don't really need a hardship requirement. So anyway, so we just want to clarify that so no one's getting confused between our zoning and our subdivision. Also, developing a parkland dedication requirement. We have a slide about that in just a second. codify the section for the abandonment of right-of-way and easements. Of course, having older parts of the community, if I'm trying to abandon a right-of-way for some reason, for instance, maybe it's something that was on a plat 100 years ago, but it's never been really used as an alley or something like that. How do we fix that? So there's ways that we can address that and have a section about how do we, as a city, abandon a right-of-way and give it back to either the property owners on either side, or you'd have to look back, and there's some cases where it may go to one individual or the other. But there's processes for that. Also talked about provisions for alleys, just clarifying if someone wanted to do an alley, how would that alley be done in new development? So just making sure that we have a standard for that. Of course, that would still be an option. You don't have to do an alley, but if you are doing an alley, this is the standard that you do it to. Including a section for proportionality appeal. Oftentimes, there's situations where a developer may say, hey, this may be a little bit, I don't think this is really my share of the responsibility that I have to improve this road or a water line or something like that. And we do want to add a procedure in there that they could bring that to the council and say, P&Z, and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what my rationale. So we'd have a section for that. And then also talking about our ensuring appropriate bond issuers. This is the different types of bonds, whether the performance bonds or warranty bonds. We just want to make sure it's very clear, and we'll tie that to our flow chart. So you'll know when are we getting our performance bond, which just makes sure that someone, if they are going ahead and going to build something, that they're going to do that. And then, of course, the warranty bond, making sure that these infrastructure improvements are good for a year or so. So when we talked about developing a parkland dedication requirement, this is one of the interesting responses that we got, because we had 43% of the respondents indicated they didn't support requiring developers to participate in a dedication program. And so this was a little bit of an outlier, of course, of what we heard before as far as doing the other plans. There's a lot of strong support. And so it was interesting that we had this response, because in the next one, we identified when people were writing on the board, there was a conflict between what we just heard in the polling. So we didn't necessarily know if our polling question was the way that I presented it, maybe was inaccurate, but maybe it wasn't, maybe it was. But we did notice that our response from our survey question didn't match our responses, both from previous plans and also what we had written on the board. So when talking about dedications for parkland, we have, depending on the size and the development, perhaps contribute money to a city fund for parkland, establish minimum number of houses to require parkland. So it does seem like there is support, but once again, when our polling question, we had that number didn't necessarily. So it may have been either the way it was presented, or it may be that's the way it was just taken. So that's one of the things that we had to identify, because there was a little conflict between those two things. Trailers, mobile homes, and trailer parks. This is another opportunity that we have to update things and to make sure that they're modern with state law, because we do have these identified in state law, and we can make sure whether we're talking about modular homes, because we do have some specific state requirements about, we can't necessarily discriminate between a modular home and a stick-built home as long as they're the same value as the surrounding properties within a certain area. So there's some things that we want to be sure that we tidy up and make sure that we're addressing with our manufactured and our modular homes and things like that. But we'll have definitions that will add that. So, but that's really what we're trying to just to focus on. That is just really adding the state definitions for this, so it's a little bit easier, whether it's a manufactured home or a mobile home or a modular home. Water and sewer. Steve James was our engineer that was helping us do that. Also works for Freeze and Nichols. We talked about looking at allowing options for dead-end lines and what ways that we can sort of address that. Of course, what a dead-end line is a water line that doesn't go anywhere. And so eventually you have to flush it to make sure that the water stays fresh and things like that. There were some opportunities to look and say, if we were going to allow something like that, the developer sets aside some type of money to pay for the flushing or something like that that goes along with that. Revising the water line designs, making sure that we can get some larger 8-inch lines rather than 6-inch lines. Clarifying the definition between private and public as far as, is this line a private line or is this a city-owned line, and where is that balancing? Really focusing on what is in the right-of-way. If it's in the right-of-way, it's predominantly a public. If it's on private property, then it's private. We also need to clarify the implications on commercial and residential development. Incorporate references from TCEQ. We just need to make sure that that was one of the references missing, that we just got to make sure that we're accurately referencing the most current TCEQ information. Also, we can add some illustrations also to help with the location of our utilities. And once again, this could be a recommendation for the engineering standards manual, so you can see where do I put the water line and all that information. And then develop guidelines for water line sizing increase. Okay, getting to our zoning, which was our biggest one. Talking about updating the number of our residential districts. We heard from a lot of the developers that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to know what district, we're trying to achieve this goal, but we really don't have a district that matches, and either have to do a PD or do some other type of district and then just work from there. So that's one of the things we want to take a look at. We also want to take a look at creating new districts aligned with small area studies. You have a copy of the small area studies there. So there's an opportunity to say, well, we can design a zoning district to help achieve the vision that we have within those documents. We also wanted to update the dimensional standards table. Right now, the dimensional standards are sort of in different places depending on the district. We'd like to put that in 1 or 2 tables, just so it'd be very easy to compare what's allowed in what district and what the different standards are. So we think that will be very useful. We also wanted to reduce the number of PDs, because oftentimes when we see a lot of planned developments, zoning districts being created, that's because a lot of our standard zoning districts don't address what a developer is trying to do. So we want to make sure that we have our zoning districts functioning properly, so there's less of a need to do a PD, so no one has to come in for a rezoning change, and someone can just go ahead and start on their development. Update and clarify uses and definitions. That's one of the things we wanted to focus on. We know that there's a few issues, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. We wanted to increase front setbacks and provide some clear sidewalk access, because we know that there is some issues with vehicles overhanging the sidewalk and things like that. So can we address that with our setback requirements as far as how far a building has to be set back? One of the majority of, when we were asked, the majority of the people were in favor of allowing greater flexibility in uses and size if scale was regulated. This would be an opportunity to take a look at how have our uses been working. And one of the opportunities, and I think I'd like to get this into when we get into the discussion part, we talked about, bed and breakfasts and things like that. As far as there's some opportunities to clarify a lot of this language about what's a bed and breakfast, what's a rooming house. There's a lot of sort of conflict when you sort of look at that, because some of these definitions include the other one in there. So we'd sort of like to know, we can clarify the definitions for sure, but when we get to the use chart and we're talking about allowing uses too, we need to clarify, do we want bed and breakfasts and single family zoning districts? Is this something we want? If so, great, we can write the ordinance that way. If it's something that we think we don't want, that's fine, we can write that way. Or if it's somewhere in the middle where we need to take a look at, certain things, of course there's an option of doing an SUP, these certain type of things. But one of the things we'd like to know a little bit later in the discussion is sort of what are your thoughts about that, because there's some opportunities we have, because this is a great opportunity to clean everything up as far as definitions and uses and what uses are allowed in which districts. Some of the feedback that we had was talking about mixed-use residential and retail can coexist on a smaller scale. So maybe having flexible on our uses, but as long as things were similar in size, maybe we could have a little bit more flexibility in some of our uses. Have a designated area for our bigger boxes. This is, our Best Buys or our bigger stores. with buffering areas to develop between that area and the neighborhood, one of the comments. So just focusing on uses in downtown and making sure that we're tailoring those uses to what we want as a community, because sometimes we can allow uses in downtown that don't meet the vision and maybe use up a building that would have been a great use for something else, but is a warehouse or something like that. So we need to make sure that we're tailoring our zoning to match the vision that we have in all our documents and where we want to go as a community. We also wanted to include standards for parking downtown to make sure that there's some ways to provide some flexibility for people trying, for businesses downtown, because whether we need to take a look at where our parking lots are and are there opportunities, because we don't necessarily want to apply our regular, when we're more out into more of our suburban areas, those type of parking standards into our downtown. Also looking at home occupations, are we allowing too many home occupations, or are we a little bit too flexible on some of those? Do we need to tighten up some of those regulations? Addressing child care related uses. Once again, this is the, there's some state definitions that, of course, if you're a child care facility, you're having to get licensed by the state. So this is one way we can use their definitions to see where these uses are allowed. And so there's really no confusion between whether we're allowing 6 or less children and, well, if we set it at 4 or less and then they have a license for 6 or less, we don't necessarily want to get into monitoring that. So it'd be an easy way just to clarify some of that. We're going to take a look at all our parking standards as far as, are we over parking? Are we under parking? Are we requiring people to put too many parking spaces on their property, or are there not enough parking spaces and there are parking issues? Provide stacking standards. This, what stacking is, it's when you go to the Chick-fil-A or whatever, how many spaces are you lined up and how many people can line up in the drive-thru. So how many spaces are required for that? And so that's one of the things that we need to take a look at. And then also providing parking dimensions and layout. We had a couple of examples in the diagnostic report showing some typical parking lot layouts. Then also provide some guidelines on accessory dwellings. When we're talking about accessory dwellings, you can think of this as your garage apartment, or if you have just a small little house, same on the property. The majority of the people agree that accessory dwelling units are appropriate in their neighborhood. And then some of the feedback we got was, depending on the lot size and the nature of the neighborhood, maybe it's appropriate. Yes, if it's controlled, so just not allowing it, but having some standards that go along with accessory dwellings. And then another one was in limited areas. So this is an opportunity to provide, whether it's the resident providing it to someone or something like that. So there are some opportunities for accessory dwellings to address some of the housing demand. 57, updating regulations for carports and garages. We have a slide on that in a second, but just taking a look at the look of those are important, so how do we address that? Reviewing setback and height regulations for our accessory buildings. So these are more also our sheds, and if I have a barn or something like that, that would be an accessory building. Enhancing the aesthetic regulations in special areas. This sort of goes back to our special area plans. What opportunities do we have to enhance the different types of landscaping, things like that. Also consider including design standards throughout the city. This is more of our building standards and also landscaping, just like in 59. Making sure that we have sections for that and they comply throughout the city. Establish minimum setback requirements for downtown. Once again, similar to our parking, we don't need to design our downtown similar to what we're trying to do along a highway or something like that. It's supposed to be more of a downtown feel, so making sure that we're treating that area that way. And then provide options for alternative compliance. And what alternative compliance we're trying to take a look at is we're trying to provide some flexibility for the developer and for staff to take a look at. Yes, we want things to look nice and to be nice. And we can write a standard for that, but we can't always think of every situation that someone's going to come across. And let's say if we had some landscaping along the street, but maybe someone's trying to redevelop an area, and well, maybe that landscaping is more appropriate, not along the street, but next to the building or something like that. We want to provide some flexibility for that design, because once again, we're trying to achieve the look of a nicer look and feel for certain areas, and how can we do that? So provide some flexibility for So going back to the carports, we did have a majority of the people agree that garages and carports are a visual issue for their neighborhood. Many of the carports build over the setbacks and poorly built. Material requirements for carports and detached garages, and as all structures, how they're maintained. So this is one of the things we want to take a look at when we get to our carports and our detached garages, similar things like that. How do we address some of those? So we know that's an issue we need to take a look at. This was our design standards throughout the city. We're asking, people indicate how they'd like to see their city incorporate design standards in selected areas. Should they apply throughout the entire city, whether we're talking about certain areas or entire city or certain areas? Sorry, misspoke there. So the comments we had back was Highway 80 downtown, Interstate 20, Historical District, Loop 281. So maybe these are some of the areas that we could have some standards for. No high-density housing in neighborhoods. All areas deserve design standards. So sort of taking a look at, do we want to focus on just certain areas and then see how that works to would it be something that we'd want to expand, or do we want to start with, a citywide effort? So those are the 62 issues we identified and talked about. And what we'd like to do tonight, what's our next steps, is to talk about those with you. Any of those 62 issues ring a bell, or is that something that sparks a passion in you that you want to talk about? We definitely want to hear that. Or if there are other things that weren't mentioned in that list of 62 that you'd want us to consider moving forward and updating the UDC. So once we get your feedback, we're going to finalize the report. So we'll make changes to the draft that you have tonight if you'd like us to do so. Once we have that draft, that's really our game plan moving forward. So we have our game plan and it's kickoff, and so we're going to follow the game plan that we have set up. So you're not surprised with anything we're trying to do updating the UDC. So it's information for everybody. Then we're going to work with staff to prepare it, and then next meet with you in the spring to show you some of the sections, not the entire thing, because once again we don't want to overwhelm you with the whole UDC, but take it in chunks. Next one. Okay. So with that, I guess what I'd like to do is, there we go. Discussion and consensus. We'd like to talk about, were there any issues that you'd wanted to talk about, or any comments or any initial thoughts that you have? Are we generally going in the right direction? Because that's what we ultimately want to know, is the things that we talked about, yes, you're heading in the right direction. You're going to see the details and be able to comment on the specifics and whether this use should be allowed in this zoning district, or, once again, going back to that bed and breakfast conversation, yes, we think bed and breakfasts should be in single families, or no, they shouldn't, or I'm somewhere in between. And you don't have to decide tonight either. You could just make sure that we're heading in the right direction, and everyone's pretty much in agreement that's where we should be going. So with that, are there any thoughts or questions about any topic?
I had one on the traffic impact analysis.
Yes.
What are you looking at to trigger that?
Well, that's a good question, because what we would take a look at is, do we want to trigger this during zoning, during subdivision? There's some issues that we need to take a look at, because what if we're already subdivided? If our trigger is, okay, when someone's coming through a plat, that's when we want you to do your traffic impact analysis. Well, it may be a little bit too late, because I may already have a lot ready to go. So maybe it's a zoning requirement that we put along with the building permit, that you'd have to go ahead and show us that, if you're going to add 1,000 vehicles a day to this part of the road, then you're going to have to show us how you're going to be able to address that, or provide a turn lane or something to that effect.
So are we trying to put another impact fee on development at that point?
That necessarily wouldn't be an impact fee. That would be more taking a look at, you're adding X amount of vehicles a day to the road, and we want to make sure that not everyone's having to, like the right lane doesn't always back up and everyone's trying to turn. So do we have that deceleration lane to get people off the main, or the far right lane, so someone could get off and turn or something like that?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is we have a piece of property, say on McCann Road or something that somebody wants to develop. And we do an impact study and we say that there's going to be too much traffic to put that subdivision or that strip center or whatever right there. We're stymieing development at that point. Who's going to do this impact analysis? Is the city going to do it, or are we going to do it individually, or is the developer going to have to provide it? Is it going to be one-sided at that point?
That's going to be provided by the developer's engineer to show them this is how many vehicles, and this is how we're going to address. This is how we're going to address the traffic coming in. So I don't think it would say that you couldn't do the development, but you're adding this much traffic. This is how you need to handle the traffic count.
Okay.
How do
Yes,
you
sir.
foresee this? Would this be more rigid than what we have now, or is there still going to be some flexibility in there with the rules and that kind of thing, or?
Well, it depends, because it's not necessarily a cut and dry answer on that. We think it will be more user-friendly and people will know what the standards are. And we think it's an opportunity to fix some of the things that aren't working. So in that aspect, I do see that as helping development and moving forward, because the goal is to make this as clear and as easy to follow as we can. Now, if we say that, oh, we want to, and we do want to fix some of the setbacks, for example, and so maybe that provides some more flexibility and fix some issues. Now, if we want to sort of, design some of the things new, maybe there are some more standards that are put in to help achieve the vision that we have in our plans and where we want to go. So I do see in that case it also could be, yes, it is adding a standard that we previously didn't have, but we decided that we wanted to help achieve the vision. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Daniel, I'm not really asking a question, I'm just making a statement. Because this whole Unified Development Code issue began 2.5 years ago during the last mayoral campaign, because development was a big issue. And I was asked this question over and over again: how do we make it easier for developers to develop in Longview? And this was the answer that we came up with. And my concern to this is to make sure of 3 things. Number one, that we're not overregulating, because I don't want big government, I want small government. An overregulated government is a big government, so that's not the intention of what I envisioned here. I want to make sure this makes it easier for developers, not harder for developers. If it makes it harder for developers, we've gone the wrong direction, because our goal is to make it simpler and easier, more straightforward, where they know what's expected and they don't have to try to guess at what city staff is trying to ask of them. It makes it very clear and concise. That's the whole purpose of doing something like this, to make what we had better, easier, simpler, more cost-effective for those trying to spend their money in Longview and grow our community. So if this is not what we're doing here, then we're on the wrong path. If it's what we're doing, then continue this path and make it simpler for our developers, for those who are trying to spend money in our community, because that's our goal. That's the only way you grow a community, is to make it easier for people to spend money here. And so this is where this came from, and I want to see this go in that direction, and I'm hoping that's what we're all here for, is to facilitate that, because if we're not on the same page. Okay?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do, while I agree with what the mayor just said to a certain degree, I do think this is a good thing, but I am a bit concerned about overregulation, because we have to be very cautious. With things aesthetically that we can see as a community, like the sign regulations, those things can be done almost immediately if we adopt those ordinances. But when we look at things, when we start getting into home occupations, childcare related issues, and something else, design standards in select areas, my thought on that is that we do need a general design. We all want our community in all areas to look nice, so that people don't do what they historically do in certain instances and feel like, okay, I can go build a frame house in this area of town, but I would never build that in that area of town. So we do need something consistent. But typically, when I think of design standards, I think that that's done through a homeowners association. So I just want us to be cautious as we move ahead in what we're doing, and that we're not, we're not setting the bar too high, but at the same time, we know what we want. And as the mayor stated, we need to make sure that it's something that's attainable as well. That's my concern, because I've been an advocate for this. I think it's important for consistency across our community, but we have to really look at the big picture of what we're dealing with. But I do appreciate your work. We've all attended those meetings, and so hopefully, once we have some time to think about it as a council and discuss it, we'll move forward. Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments. As we talked before the meeting, the devil is in the details. When we get into these, our signs, currently we do not allow digital billboards. I wouldn't have a problem in certain zones allowing digital billboards. It would have to be, fairly restricted, but sidewalks, big thing in our comprehensive plan. I'm necessarily not opposed to just requiring sidewalks on one side in residential areas, depending upon the density of the residential area, requiring it on both sides for collectors and arterials. Streamlining the development process certainly has got to be the #1 priority in anything we're talking about. Parkland dedication, I know that's a hot button item. I would like to see in the final product some options for setting aside a restricted fund on the city for parkland purchase that developers might contribute to rather than dedicating land itself. Parks, I think, are a perfect opportunity for public-private partnerships. My part of Longview is deficient by 13 neighborhood parks and 4 community parks. We've got to address that, and I think we can work with the developers toward that end. There's a lot of confusion on the definition of mobile homes, RVs, modular homes, manufactured homes. I had one instance in my district that, it looked like a duck, it walked like a duck, it quacked like a duck, but it was certified as a modular home, but it looked very much like a mobile home. We got to tie those down, and I think you're on the right track for those. Bear with me. That's it for now.
I do want to make a comment, just since you asked for consensus. I have had a running list of items since we knew that this was happening, and I agree very much with what Mayor Mack has stated, that the importance is that we streamline and we make ourselves friendly for businesses. I think it's also important that we consider the comprehensive plan, like we're doing. And to that end, I had kind of kept a list of what I think focuses on the comprehensive plan, and also to protect the city and be fiscally responsible on the city's behalf. So where we are now has put us at a position where we overwhelmingly hear from constituents that they want sidewalks. And the city doesn't have a big bucket of money to go out and put sidewalks everywhere. So it would be responsible of us to look at changing that ordinance so that we can help develop that in the future. The same way with flood issues. I have a lot of that in my district with new development, and we don't have a big bucket of money to go out and make big flood drainage area changes from the city's perspective. So I think for us to be fiscally responsible, these are important changes to look at what we hear constituents telling us they need for flood damage, as well as design standards, because we hear that a lot through the comprehensive plan, and sidewalks moving forward. So I'm glad that all of those things are addressed in there.
And one of our goals in improving the design and the feel of it is all these issues, you'll be able to see where they rest, and we can look at those easily. It's not going to be hard to navigate. So when we talk about whether it's sidewalks and how we treat those, we can all easily go to this section and clearly outline in a nice outline format. This is what's the standards are. So that's our goal, to make sure that, you know, often the question is when we're developing ordinances and stuff like that, well, we definitely don't want to set the bar too high, but we also don't want to set the bar too low where we're all bumping our knees. So where is that balance? And that balance will come from P&Z and council to let us know, have we hit the mark? So with everything that's going to be in the UDC, it'll be easy to take a look at and see, you know, where is that bar for us, and how we address it. And so because we want to have these discussions easily talked about and everyone to easily understand what we're trying to do and what the standards are. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Daniel, my hot button is the sidewalks. I'm a proponent of sidewalks. I don't want our requirement for sidewalks to limit future development. And so how do you plan to get input from our local builders, be it retail or residential or commercial, where you might be requiring future sidewalks?
Well, that's one of the things that we'll take a look at, because it's going to depend on what type of street you're on. You know, so if we're on our arterial or something like that, yes, we probably have sidewalks on there, and figuring out what, you know, when's the appropriate time to put those in, and those type of questions. Is that addressing your question?
Yeah,
I don't know if it.
You know, I think we have to make sure Longview's still builder friendly. If they're looking at building here or Lindale, we don't want to drive them to Lindale because they have to build sidewalks here. But I grew up in a neighborhood that had sidewalks. I didn't know you could not have sidewalks till I moved to Longview. So I'm for sidewalks. I just don't want it to limit development. Okay.
Because that's definitely something we could take a look at, as far as, you know, are there any type of exemptions to any type of sidewalk requirements? Is because sometimes there's going to be a case where if we're redeveloping in an older area that doesn't have sidewalks. So will we just have a sidewalk for this one property, then on either side? That doesn't make sense. But we want to look for opportunities to, and yes, we'd need a more, maybe that's a capital improvement idea for later in future budgets, identify areas where we need to go and install sidewalks as a community, and do it as a community thing. But in our newer areas where we have existing sidewalks, maybe it's more appropriate in that case. So I think that's when we get into the details, I think that's a good thing that we'll need to take a look at. Because sometimes, yes, sidewalks are very usable and attractive, and because you don't want to necessarily walk in the street all the time. But when is it appropriate? And I think that's one of the important things that we got to figure out, what's appropriate for this code.
Thank you.
Okay, Daniel, I had a couple of points. I had asked staff to bring back to your team, coming from planning and zoning, I want to see a modification written in there that we put the signs up prior to the P&Z, like the other towns do. Hearings coming.
Gotcha.
Because we are finding the notification is, they're doing the geography, but the people are driving past the property going, what did y'all do?
Yeah.
So that was just a minor point that I'd asked to be put in, that we do get the signage up. P&Z is meeting on such and such to consider. So the other one I'm curious to see, and I'd like your straight from the line input, where are we going to deal with the extraterritorial jurisdiction issues?
Well, that's going to,
Now, let me preface by saying I understand they're held up in state court right now in a lot of cases, but where does it flow into the master redo?
all right. And without knowing too much on what the specific annexation or the ETJ issues are here, just for the crowd, we need to talk about extraterritorial jurisdiction. Any city in Texas, we can only do our zoning within our city limits. So zoning only applies in our city limits, so when you look at the zoning map, it's city limits only. When you talk about subdivision regulations, and what those are is, you know, how you build the street, how you submit a plat, because everyone who lives in a subdivision, there's actually a plat that goes along with that shows where the roads go, and then the city still looks at, you know, where the lines go, the construction plans, all that, to make sure, and those are built to city standards. So in the ETJ, we can apply our subdivision regulations according to the state law. So that's really the primary difference. And currently with the state legislature, they're making it, depending on how you are, if you're a sort of a proponent of the city boundaries expanding, making annexation more difficult. If you're living out in the county and you don't want to be a part of the city, well, then it's going your way. So that's sort of the issue that the state's working out right now. But as far as what we're doing with the code, you know, is it more the subdivision-related issues, or do we think
Well,
we're going to be expanding?
subdivision-related issues,
Okay.
you touched on the fact that they're gonna change or look at the bonding. We've had some issues that have come up over that in recent, you know, the letters of credit versus bond versus
Yeah.
all of those things. And I guess the last question, if I had a piece of property right now today in Longview, Texas, that would develop into 100 residential lots, prior to this coming online and post coming this online, how much difference should a developer see in the difference of time? Understanding that the current process takes quite a long trail.
Well, hopefully it will be streamlined, so it should be less. So we should have our process, and staff's doing a good job with the process now. But there's opportunities where we can look to, can we shorten things? Can we work on our calendar and things like that? And the most important thing is, can we meet with them and to get issues ironed out before anyone spends a lot of money with an engineer or trying to design something. So because staff does a good job really working and getting to know people. And that's what we're trying to do, because it's a team effort. Because yes, basically all of our cities are built by the private community, and that's who builds it. And we're thankful for that. Most of our roads here in the state of Texas are all built by the private community. Only basically our freeways and our highways are built by the citizens. But the important thing to think about when we're talking about that is to sort of ask the question, why does the state allow us to control these things in the ETJ? That's a lot of money and things like that. Well, because one day that area is probably going to be within the city, and guess who gets to pay to fix all the roads and to fix all the infrastructure? It's everyone here in the room tonight who that financial burden falls upon. So what the state says is like, okay, you're going to be picking up the tab for this road for the rest of time. You know, there's no one going to come. The state's not going to come and help us ever fix one of these local roads. So this is why the state's saying, okay, this is why you have the plat approval authority and the ability to make sure that someone does a bond, because we don't ever want the city being on the hook for carrying the private side of something through. So we don't want the city to have to be the developer of a private subdivision if the developer goes bankrupt or walks away from the development.
And the last thing is, I noticed and I think there will be some interest as we get to traders, manufactured homes, and trailer parks, but the one thing that I would bring to you guys' attention, if you probably didn't already know it, and I've been here about 55 of my 60 years, we have a lot of bar ditches in this town. And we're not all curbed and guttered. This is not a curb and gutter town. Whereas I think that may be impeding some of the lot costs that would be producing that other house. And so I'd like that at least studied.
Okay, I'll definitely take a look at that.
One comment. I think from what you're telling me, it's a good chance for us to clean up some of our dusty and antiquated rules and regulations. Should help staff. It's something we did, a uniform part. I'm a salesman. We all are salesmen in this room because we all live in Longview, Texas. Unlike what the mayor said, this gives us a chance to clean it. I hope that's what your goal is, to clean it up and make it user-friendly. no matter what I say, I am so tired of hearing somebody tell me these words. I don't want to build in Longview. It's too difficult. I'm a proud Longview citizen. I've invested my life, most of it with my kids, in my business. I don't want to hear that anymore. Bottom line is, it's a marketing I'm selling every day, not just to bring in business, but how about we keep people in Longview? So you got to blend the two. But I'm tired of hearing those words in my trade. Constantly, I hear it. Well, why don't you come to Longview? Are you kidding me? And you say, well, you didn't get those remarks in your little meetings, but come follow my path every day, and I'll introduce you to them and hear their complaints. They're not complaining about our staff. They're complaining about the whole complex issues. So if we're going to be able to clean it up to make our staff better because they don't have some adequate, let's get that done. We're building an advertising campaign, so when we hit the radio, everybody wants to say, I'm proud to be from Longview, or I want to come to Longview, but I'm tired of hearing the opposite. I'm here, and I'm damn proud to live here. I want everybody else to feel the same way.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly pleased within several parts of this presentation and diagnostic report, you're proposing to give staff a little more flexibility to make those minor decisions without having to go through the whole regulation process to get a decision made and an answer to whoever the builder or the developer is. So in certain instances, I think that's a good idea and will streamline things.
Understand something, council and commission, that the consultants are here to give us recommendations. They're not adjudicating any laws or any ordinances. That'll be our job to do that and our staff to do that. And we'll rely heavily upon development services who live this every day. Michael and your staff do a wonderful job, but I know you all are looking forward to having some relief as well, because you guys get beaten down every day, as we all know. But this is for us to evaluate, to mull over, and I suggest that each one of us, if you have concerns or questions, write them down, give them to Michael, give them to Daniel, and let them continue to proceed forward. We've heard the presentation, we have the information before us, we can all digest this, we're all adults and can read very well. And so we can take this information and we can process it, and we can then regurgitate what you want to be looked into through either Daniel or through Michael, and then we will let this process continue. Because I think we're on the right track. We just need to stay on the track that this originally began with, and we've already stated that, so no need to continue to state this over and over. Okay? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns of Mr. Daniel while he's here? Very good. Then if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for being here.
Good job.